A phrase that always raises my attention and leads me to listen more closely when speaking with someone is, "I heard." I've quite often experienced people sharing information that they say they've heard without saying where they've heard it. Frequently, when asked, they don't even know where they heard it. I find this phenomenon fascinating and troubling. It leaves me wondering how to deal with this very human tendency to simply accept information that we want to believe. This isn't a new issue, even if it is more pervasive today, as hypersaturated with information as we are. Our Torah portion this week has a line that has led to a similar debate amongst the sages for generations. As Moses recaps the past for the Israelites, he tells them, "God declared to you the covenant that you were commanded to observe, the 10 Commandments, inscribing them on 2 tablets of stone. At the same time, Adonai commanded me to impart to you laws and rules for you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy." In these few verses, we have one key source for all of the information, namely God. But 3 different ways the information was conveyed. At first, we learn that the Israelites hear the 10 Commandments in God's voice for themselves. Then that God inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone. And then that God commanded Moses to impart laws and rules to the Israelites. Moses is outlining these 3 different sources of information as being the basis for his current speech, and begins by citing the source that the Israelites heard for themselves, then citing the source that the Israelites can see for themselves, namely the tablets of stone, and then ends with explaining where his personal authority comes from to provide these further commandments. Moses is not simply speaking based on assumed or implied personal authority. Moses is taking the time to cite and vet his sources for the Israelites. As we all know, he says many challenging things and demands a great deal from them. And in order to do so, he recognizes that the sources for the information he is basing his demands and claims on are deeply important. The rabbinic tradition continues this trend from Moses. The sages of the Talmud debated that it was contained in each of these 3 sources that Moses cited. They land on the Israelites hearing and understanding only the first 2 commandments of the 10, but that these 2 commandments are the root for the rest of Torah, and therefore were the only ones necessary to hear directly. Ramban, a medieval sage, elaborates, saying that in the first 2 commandments, the Israelites heard the utterance of speech and understood the words, even as Moses understood them. But from then on, in the rest of the commandments, they heard a voice of speech, but they did not understand it. And it became necessary for Moses to explain to them each and every commandment until they understood it from Moses. It's clear here that our rabbis thought quite critically about the nature of and importance of understanding the sources of information. These examples display the critical eye with which our tradition understands the necessity of vetting and researching sources of information. What this teaches us is the incredible importance of doing the work to know where our information comes from, both in order to fully understand it and to be able to undermine our own human tendencies towards simply accepting the sources most comfortable to us. When we encounter an event firsthand, that is solid information on which we can build. When we read a written document from a primary source, and therefore a primary document, that is solid information on which we can build. When we have an intermediary interpreting the primary sources, we are then stepping into a space in which we have to think more critically. The rabbis of the Talmud imply a very clear method of overcoming this issue. After discussing what was actually heard at Sinai by the Israelites, they go on to list the ways the wisest descendants of those Israelites managed, through their own creative power, to establish the entirety of Torah on a handful of commandments, or even just one. To add further emphasis to the underlying principle here, the final one is debated. That is, who was able to establish the whole Torah on exactly one commandment? Rabbi Simlai, a 3rd century sage in Palestine, taught the prophet Amos came and established the 613 mitzvot upon one. As it is stated, so says God to the house of Israel, "Seek me and live." Rav Nachman bar Yitzhak, a 4th century Babylonian rabbi, objected to this, as the verse does not specify the manner in which one should seek God. Rather, he suggested that Habakkuk came and established the 613th mitzvot upon one, as it is stated in Habakkuk, but the righteous person shall live by his steadfastness. In this we are given guidance as to how to seek the truth. We must begin, as Amos taught, seeking truth in the first place, not just seeking the comforting knowledge that will confirm our already held beliefs, but instead seeking that which underlies all. And then, as Habakkuk stated, we must be steadfast in our findings, which is to say, be steadfast in your search for truth, and steadfast once you believe you have found it. Certainly, we all need a Moses to be an intermediary for us on many topics. They're specialists for a reason. I'm not equipped to do firsthand research on the realities, effects, or nature of vaccines or something as complex as climate change. But I'm quite aware of my own impulses towards confirmation bias. And I'm capable of checking the validity of sources for my information. This approach to learning, to understanding, is central to being Jewish, foundational to the whole of Torah. It is our responsibility to carry it forward, and it is perhaps one of the most integral mitzvot. The Shema, the watchword of our faith, is often translated, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one," but can be translated as, "Understand, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one." Just as Amos beseeched the Torah on seeking God, the Shema beseeches us not to just accept God on faith, but to work to understand everything, including what it means to relate to God and for God to be one. As our world continues to fray along lines of ideology, often unrooted from clear factual sources, let each of us remember this central tenet of our tradition. May we all, each of us, find a merit in the search for truth and the steadfastness to stand by it. Ken Yehi Ratzon.